I want to thank the INSEAD Alumni Association in France for hosting this conversation. I would call it a fireside chat, but for many of us, it's the heat of the summer, so we don't need to be next to a fireside for now. So this, let me just share with you before going into the content, a couple of sanity rules. So it's a discussion for you. So the way it's going to run is that I will have a couple of questions that we will discuss with Ravi, but please use the chat in the Zoom to ask any questions that you'd like to ask Ravi, and I will pick them as we speak. And I will make sure that you can be included in the conversation. So I think Magali, thank you very much, Magali, for helping us with the logistics. She's running the show in terms of mics and stuff. So I think it will be an exchange through the chat rather than with you being able to ask directly the question. So we have more or less an hour and 15 minutes. So this is a very significant time where we can go in depth into the content. So that's very, very cool. So I'm Fanny Potier. Most of you would know me. I'm an INSEAD alum from 2001. I've been working 25 years. I currently work at BCG. I've chosen the people topic 20 years ago and consulting because I felt that I would have more impact on the topic if I was going at it from a consulting standpoint. And I'm extremely happy to be there this morning and lunchtime for you, Ravi, I guess, on this conversation. It's an honor, and you have many things to share with us today. I share with you, I'm not going to quote the book so much, but I share with you a sense of optimism in the current times we are living in, but I also recognize that it's a little bit challenging given the uncertainty and the volatility of the situations and the many situations we're going through. So let me just introduce yourself, Ravi. Welcome very quickly, and because it's a very long intro, I could be very long at listing your bio. But I'd like to say that Ravi is the board chair of the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet, as you can see in the title on the Zoom. You're a trustee of Rockefeller Foundation. You're also a founder or the founder of the Global Alliance for Mass Entrepreneurship, which is a coalition which aims to create 10 million entrepreneurs in India by 2030. That's very ambitious. And you have previously served as board chair of Microsoft India, Bank of Baroda, and you as the co-chairman of Infosys. You have many university degrees. I won't list them all. You are, I just want to stop 1 minute here. You are the author of 2 best-selling books, What the Heck Do I Do With My Life? How to Flourish in Our Turbulent Times. And the second one is Conquering the Chaos, Win in India, Win Everywhere. And you have been voted as one of India's best management thinkers by Thinkers 50 and as Microsoft Alumni Hero 2020. So very impressive. Just for everybody in the room, we are going to particularly have a conversation on what the heck do I do with my life. And I just want to mention in passing briefly that Ravi is kindly offering a 40% discount on the book. Do you want to add anything at that stage, Ravi, before I shoot you the first question?
No, thank you for the kind introduction and for the opportunity to be in conversation with all of you today.
Thank you, Ravi. So sorry, it's too tempting. So I just want to start with, what the heck do you do with your life?
Well, I just live it. But a little more seriously, I think living it very differently than I did most of my life. About 10 years ago, Fanny, I made a decision that as I was leaving Microsoft, that it's very easy to jump on another treadmill and do more of the same. And, but I said, look, I'm not going to be an employee anymore, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. And so I began around 2011, a series of experiments. And gradually it's resulted in a portfolio of things I do today. As you said in your introduction, I'm spending a lot of my time now, most of my time, on this intersection between climate change and entrepreneurship. So I think that's really important, a lot of fun. I'm also a writer. In addition to the books, I keep a regular column and posts on LinkedIn, etc., and a motivational speaker like I am today. I made a decision along the way. I read this interesting book by a guy called Tim Ferriss, who wrote something called the 4-Hour Work Week or something like that. And I said, oh, what is the minimum number of hours that I need to work for money? And so I worked out an economic model, which has so far sustained me for 10 years, where I work for approximately half a day every month to make the money I need. And the rest of the time, I'm free to do the things I really enjoy. And so, yeah, I'm in a good place because I do what I want and what I enjoy. I hang out only with people I like. I don't hang out with people I don't like. I care less and less about what the world thinks of me as I realize the world isn't thinking of me. So a state of good freedom. So that's kind of a serious answer to your question.
And you have a less serious one? No, kidding. How did you become a leader? And actually, I mean, I take the point on ego that you mentioned, but do you see yourself as a leader, and how did you become a leader?
Yeah, well, it's an important question, Fanny, because I think leadership, this issue of leadership, is the central issue for the world, for every country, for every organization. And so in my book, I spend a whole chapter on it. And I say, look, we need to start thinking differently about leadership. A leader is not somebody who has a big title or a lot of power and people reporting to them. Leadership is an act. It's how you behave, how you act that makes you a leader or not a leader. And yes, I think I try to act mostly in ways that could be reasonably qualified as showing leadership behavior. And you asked, how did I become a leader? I think I started becoming more aware and conscious of this when I was about 25. It was funny how it happened. Somebody told, I was working in a factory in the US, and somebody said, oh, you should apply to Harvard Business School. And so I said, oh, okay. Then I applied to Harvard Business School and very promptly got my rejection letter. And I was a very persistent person. So those days there was no email, right? This is 1988 or something. So I called the admissions office and kept calling till I got a person and said, why did you reject me? They said, well, you haven't shown anything exceptional. You haven't shown any leadership behavior. Oh, so I said, what would constitute leadership behavior? And she said, well, you haven't led a team. You haven't shown some leadership in society. So I went back to the company where I was working, Cummins, and said, look, I want to be a manager right away. They said, well, sure, wait your turn. In 10 years, you might. I said, no. I want to be managing, leading something now. And the only thing that was available was a small factory that was about to be closed down, that had remained managerless for a long time. I was to find out why, because it was a horrible place. Nobody wanted it. But I took the job, and that was my first experience of both management and leadership. And it launched me on the course of ever bigger adventures. And yeah, so every journey starts with a single step. And I remember that being distinctively the point where I started acting intentionally as a leader.
Have you followed in the further choices that you've made, and then we'll come to the point when you actually made a different choice, or decided to express your leadership differently? Did you have a red thread at particular junction in your leadership career?
What's the red thread?
Some purpose or some intention.
Yeah, I think so. I think there are 2 or 3 things which have remained constant in this journey. One of them is I'm intensely curious, and I've retained my curiosity over the years, and I'm curious about everything. And that allows me to sometimes, find new adventures like the one I'm on. You didn't talk in the introduction, thank goodness, but I spent 4 years working with UNICEF on building a global youth mission. That was a big adventure. And so I think if I hadn't stayed curious, I wouldn't have necessarily done many of these interesting things. The second one is I was always willing to swallow my fears and take on these big challenges from time to time. A lot of us have opportunities to do these things occasionally, but we're afraid. And so we don't give ourselves permission to take that challenge. We go, oh, it might not work out well. What will so-and-so think? Or, there's financial consequences to it. And so I think I was a little bit more willing to overcome these fears and take on these challenges. And another perhaps red thread is, and I think this is an important one for everybody listening in, I never ever, Fanny, paid any attention to the job description. Every one of us goes into a job or a role, and there's some description of what you're supposed to do or what is expected. And I never paid any attention to it. I merely looked at what needed to be done and, tried to do the best. So these principles, I think, have been underlying all the many adventures and up to this day.
Thank you. So before we continue a little bit on the some of the content related to the book, can you tell us a little bit more about the genesis of this book?
Yeah. Well, first of all, let me tell you about the book in a nutshell. So this is the cover of the book, and the most important thing about it is there's a small dinosaur in the middle. That's T-Rex. And why T-Rex is on the cover is because whenever there's a period of sudden and extreme change, it throws up both opportunities and challenges, but generally, a lot of people, a lot of creatures struggle to adapt. And if you struggle to adapt, you become extinct. But if you're able to adapt, then you flourish like the mammals. So that was the story behind putting T-Rex on the cover. We're going through a period of extreme change. And just look at what all is happening in the world around us, and you get a sense of it, and things are just getting really interesting. And so it poses a very severe adaptive challenge for organizations, for countries, and most of all for each of us as individuals. And so this book is essentially aimed at provoking you to think about how ready are you for such extreme change? Do you have the mindset? Do you have the skills? Have you thought about the strategies, the assets that it's going to take to come out well? And the genesis of this actually is about 10 years ago, where I wrote a series of articles in a big Indian newspaper, very widely read Indian newspaper, about my shift from Microsoft, my journey to no longer be an employee but become a social entrepreneur, writer, etc., and how this required me to face down many fears and insecurities I had. And that got a huge following. So for years afterwards, people would come to me in restaurants and on planes and say, "Are you Ravi who wrote that book? It really changed my life." And I said, "Oh, here's something, that's an interesting thing." Then I started writing more on LinkedIn, and I found that as the world is becoming more crazy and complex, a lot of people who are looking for some clarity. There's more confusion, there's more anxiety, a little bit of depression, and people are looking for clarity, direction, tools to navigate this. And so at some point, about just before COVID, I decided to write a book. And the thing about writing a book, and I know this from being an author before, is nobody reads a book. Almost nobody reads a book. You guys might be different. But the purpose of writing the book is twofold. One is it brings clarity to your own mind. So it helped me become clear and organize my thoughts and ideas. And second, it gives me the excuse now to come and talk to people such as yourselves. And so that's how the book project came to be. But even now, I think more people will take the ideas through conversations like this, or physical conversations and podcasts and things like that, rather than the book per se.
Okay. I'm a very poor sleeper, so I actually read many books, but I do believe there is a lot of virtual books.
Increase.
Sorry?
I said, may your tribe increase. May there be many more people who read books like you.
Yeah. Okay, so I think you've mentioned that many times already in our short time together. We're living in an uncertain and volatile world. I won't coin the VUCA term that probably most of the participants know. I'm really curious, what would you say to a 13-year-old today? I have a daughter, she's 13.
I think it's a great question and I've learned this now through my work at UNICEF with young people. One is, don't ever try to give advice to a teenager. So I instead would try and encourage your daughter. I'd encourage her to remain curious and explore her ideas, okay, in all the ways possible. I think this curiosity is a muscle we are born with, but then gets beaten out of us by conditioning. So that's one. And the other one is to encourage a young person like her to develop a sense of what people call, or psychologists call, agency. Agency, this belief that to a much greater extent than you realize, you have the power to make your own decisions and choices, to never become a victim where you abdicate these choices and decisions to your parents or people around you or to the society. And that's what I would encourage with young people. And, we do this, Fanny, in the most remarkable ways in UNICEF with young people from the poorest socioeconomic backgrounds, just the toughest environments. And I don't know if people are interested, but we have time, so I'll talk about it. So you don't go into this environment where people barely have enough food to eat and they're just existing and talk about leadership or agency. Instead, you sit down and build a little trust and you say, what is your biggest frustration or problem? And then the kid might say, the biggest frustration I have is that the school toilet has been broken for 2 years and nobody is doing anything about it. I keep complaining, nobody cares. I've stopped complaining. And that's a big deal. And we said, oh, did you ever try fixing it? No, what? How can I fix it? Don't be crazy. I said, no. Think about it and want you to come back with 2 more friends who are willing to work with us and we'll help you fix it. And they come back and then we start a project and guide them through fixing it. At the end of it, it's like a light bulb has gone off. Suddenly they believe they can do something. And when they do it, others are willing to follow. This is that sense of self-belief, of agency that I'm talking about. And once you're able to get that going in a person, particularly a young person, almost everything else happens. They figure it out. So for a teenager, I'd say curiosity and agency, the self-belief are 2 of the most important things I try to ignite, if it isn't there already.
Thank you. So we're INSEAD right here, or INSEAD, former INSEAD participants, and maybe there are some MBA students or other participants in some programs. If you're sorry, I'm going to be a bit repetitive here because I'm so curious. If you're about 25, 30-ish, what are your choices, your options? What can you do? Or what would you tell them? Sorry, what would you tell them?
What I would tell, well, first of all, being 25, 30 today is totally different, Fanny, as you know, from being 25 when you started and entered the workforce, or I entered a little bit before that. The world has changed, and there are just infinitely more opportunities, even though there are many more challenges. And there's also an explosion of opportunities that we couldn't have even imagined at the start of my career. And so that's the good news. The bad news is you have to figure it out for yourself. So what advice would I give somebody at that stage is to take more risk. So in the book I write about, actually, which is, it's curious, when I talk to older people who are 70 or 80 or approaching end of life, many of them have a lot of regret. And the regrets are not about risk they took that didn't work out. It's about that they didn't take enough risk. Okay. And so I would say that when you're in the 20s, your risk capacity is at a maximum. So take as much risk as possible, try as many adventures as possible. If you want to go live somewhere else, do that. If you want to start a business, start that. Try as many things, because through these experiments, you'll discover more about yourself, what you're good at, what gives you joy, and you'll discover more about the world. And you will, through that discovery process, converge on what is ultimately to be your path. So that, I would say, do much more of that before life starts beating the heck out of you. You get married, you start a family, you have responsibilities, you have to earn. It's just going to grind you down after that. So yeah, before that happens, take risk, be adventurous.
Okay, so now the last one. So I'm turning 50 this year. I feel like I'm still 25, but so what would you advise me? Or not advise, again, sorry. What a couple of things that I...
So what I would suggest is to think about this period of 50 to 75 as perhaps the most fertile, most creative period of your life. Okay, why? Because, the people are now beginning to talk about this stage as the third chapter. Life used to be in two chapters. First, you build your career, then you retire and enjoy. That's it, 2 chapters. Now people are realizing there's this golden new middle chapter. And first of all, you live life, you're more mature, you have less of an ego if you've grown up, if you've matured well. You may have put away a little bit of money, so there's a little bit of financial freedom, hopefully. So you can truly begin to do things that you enjoyed and do things that you consider important. Okay, so what I'd say is, don't just stay on the treadmill. Start doing experiments, micro experiments, and figure out what you can do that is more enjoyable and more impactful. And that's what I started doing 10 years ago. And it can be the best years of your life. I truly now, I'm 59, about to turn 60 next year. And I think everything I've done before was just learning and rehearsal for what I am to do next. And that is going to be my most significant work. So to have this optimism rather than think about, oh, now what will I do? Nobody will give me a job, and start feeling negative about yourself, about your prospects, to see this as the best period, entering the best chapter. So congratulations.
Thank you. Certainly feel excited.
Sure.
I have co-authored a piece recently, which is called Why the World Needs Generative Leaders Now. And just to coin the term, generative leaders make the world a better place than how they found it. You covered a little bit of that already, but can you come back to why does leadership matter so much in current times, and what makes a good leader from your perspective?
Thank you for asking that question. It's it's the reason I write and do a lot of this. I do think, by the way, I went online and I read your writing on generative leadership. As I said, I don't know, Fanny, let me find out more. And I think it's very good, but in a sense, it's still within the old paradigm of leadership. Okay, so let me come back to that. But why is leadership so important? Because if you look at the mess we have in the world, whether it's climate, whether we look at the extreme inequality that we have in polarization, we have in many countries, and you look at these issues, we have the resources, the know-how, the talent to solve these issues, but we seem to be completely stuck, or some cases actually regressing. And that's because of lack of leadership. Then you say, why are we so starved for leadership? And it's true everywhere, because I do follow a little bit of what's happening in France. America is my second home, so I know a lot of what's going on. In all these countries, we have a crisis of leadership. And that's because we're living with a very antiquated idea of what leadership is, or who is a leader. And usually it is that we conflate leadership with position, with title, with authority, with power, mandates. So we expect the prime minister or the president to do something about climate change. We expect the CEOs of big companies to do something about, and they don't. And so what? So if we're going to survive, if we're going to flourish, if we're going to create functioning societies, countries, we need a very different model of leadership where we realize, as I said before, leadership is an act. And therefore, leadership, anybody can be a leader. Leadership can come from anywhere and everywhere. And only if we see many, many more people stepping up and tackling these issues, and some of them go on to do amazing things, is change going to happen. And if you can be one of those leaders, then you don't have to worry about VUCA and where will the next job come from. The world is going to come to you and look up to you, and you'll never lack opportunities. And that's been my experience. So in my book, Fanny, which I hope many of you will go on to buy and read, I give examples of just the most ordinary people from the humblest backgrounds doing extraordinary things by leaning into their calling. I talk about this young boy, Rehan, who lives in a garbage dump outside one large Indian city, and how he is transforming his community at the age of 12 and 13. I talk about my neighbor here in the city of Bangalore and how she is a housewife, got frustrated with the garbage on the streets, and in 5 years has become the leading waste warrior and activist out here, where the government cannot do things without her helping. And, I look at my own career. How did I come here and get to do the things I've done? It's because I never looked at what was asked of me, or I never asked for permission. If something needed to be done, I just stepped up and did it. So I think we need many more of us acting in these ways on issues that we are passionate about, care about, rather than saying, oh, what can I do? The world is falling apart. Okay, let me get on a plane and take a vacation and create even more carbon footprint. So now you ask, what can we do as to be better leaders? And again, it's there in one of the chapters. But I think there are 4 or 5 qualities we have to cultivate. And the first one is empathy. And empathy is not the same as compassion. Empathy is sensitivity to what is going on around you. Okay, because from that sensitivity, you become aware of the situation and the urgency, and that moves you to do something. So right now, if you had empathy, you would realize our planet is on fire. Okay, and at the very least, you say, okay, let me start changing my personal habits. Maybe it won't change the final outcome, but I'll feel better about my life. And then that may lead you to actually take bigger and bolder steps. Like, that's what I've done. Empathy is one. The second one is action. You can't just sit around feeling bad for the world. You have to decide to start acting. And every journey starts with small, small steps. And when you take some small steps, suddenly you realize others who were waiting start following. They were just waiting for somebody else to go. And there's that beautiful YouTube video called The First Leader. And these drunken kids on a slope at a picnic. And one kid starts dancing. Okay. And suddenly the second kid stands up and starts dancing. And before you know, everybody's dancing. And so it shows how leadership and followership happens. So if you take the first step, you may be amazed sometimes at how many people are just waiting and who join hands with you. The third one is courage. And the courage to act without asking for somebody for permission, to be willing to ask for permission, for forgiveness rather than permission. The courage to, fail and get up and keep going. I think that's another quality. A fourth one would be trust. Trust is what keeps the leader-follower equation together. Most of these people don't have to follow you. Okay, and the moment you lose their trust, they disappear. And the way you lose trust by making it about yourself. So being very mission-oriented and remembering to keep your ego somewhat in the background. And the final thing is, it's very practical, but you better understand power and influence. It's very hard to make change and impact, whether it's within BCG or whether it's in a country or in society, if you don't understand how to use power and influence for your mission. Anyway, I'm saying all these very provocatively so that there may be some questions, because right now there aren't many questions in the chat box. So I said, let me stir it up. So these are some ways.
Thank you. On the question piece, so I have one, so I'll shoot it now. But I think we can take 15-20 minutes at the end when we'll go back in. Everybody will be visible, and then people can ask their question directly also orally if they feel like it's kind of a debate, and they can ask a question directly at you. So I have a question though from Chandru. How do you see climate change impacting the world now, from geopolitics, conflicts to migration? And risk apart, what are the opportunities for entrepreneurs, I guess, in the sustainability spectrum, putting all of that together below the umbrella sustainability, I guess, Chandru.
Chandru was asking a very central set of questions. I've now decided to move into this space and see what difference we can make. But I look at myself as a student in kindergarten in my understanding of climate and energy transition. But already I begin to see just how bad things are. We're all pretending. We're all pretending that, oh, there is this Paris Agreement, we will be able to limit things to 1.5 degrees, and then gradually the world will go back. But if you look at our own individual behaviors, for most people, precious little has changed. And after COVID, we're going quickly to right back, consuming the way we were, same lifestyles. If you look at the behaviors of companies, there's a lot of greenwashing, but the fundamentals are not changing fast enough. Sure, some companies have net zero commitments, and there's some baby steps in that direction. But compared to the urgency of the issue, very little. You look at how are the countries doing in terms of their own net zero goals and the progress. I'm putting together a presentation right now on this, but it's for most countries negligible. And then Ukraine war breaks out and there's an energy shortage and we actually start moving backwards. So I think there is now zero probability of limiting warming to 1.5. I think we are more realistically looking at 2.5. And if we don't quickly wake up, it could be worse. And that is absolutely catastrophic, absolutely catastrophic. And we are just beginning to see how bad things are with the heat waves. I was in Delhi last week. The heat index was 52. In May, the surface temperatures in many parts of India touched 65. I mean, that's insane temperatures. You've got the, I was just reading in the US, this large lake called Lake Mead, where the Hoover Dam has dried up, like Lake Baikal. Okay, it's just, there's nothing left. It's just stunning. You see the heat wave in Europe, the polar temperatures, my God. And yet we're all just walking around like it's going to be okay. It's not going to be okay. And of course, that's going to ignite lots of, suffering, and the poor will suffer the most. And there will be migrations, and there will be conflict, and all those, and things which are unimaginable. We haven't seen anything unfold yet. So the key is to begin to change, and change starts with each one of us. I just wrote an article for Times of India on this, why it's important that change begins with individual habits, even though we don't believe it makes any difference. It makes a difference because everybody on this call is in a position of some influence. You're leading an organization or a large part of an organization. And when you start changing and become sensitive yourself, you then begin to look at the behavior of the organization, and then you're able to influence things at a larger scale. So it's quite crucial. Then Chandru asked about entrepreneurship. Well, I don't think the shift is going to happen without a massive amount of entrepreneurship, right? So Bill Gates, in his book that came out about a year and a half on climate change, points out how this whole decarbonization is a 50 trillion economy. Everything has to be reinvented. The way we grow food, the way we distribute food, all our building and construction materials from cement, steel, concrete, we have to find green ways of manufacturing it. Mobility has to be reimagined. So there are millions and millions of businesses, small and large, which have to be built. So it's the greatest opportunity also. And I think, fortunately, many more people and more capital is seeing that. And that's one of the more positive things I see in this journey.
Thanks. I was just, I've used it to present the book or to present yourself. You talk about intentional life. What are the building blocks of living an intentional life? I mean, that's when I asked you about the rest red, you were saying, okay, and also presenting yourself, I made some choices and with intention. And can you just share a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I realized somewhere in the journey of writing this book and thinking about things, that I myself, for large parts of my life, was just living on a treadmill or sleepwalking through life. Okay. Why do I say that? There was so much that is going on around us. But when you're busy, building a professional life, raising a family, it's all consuming. It's very easy to just become very focused on your life. That itself takes most of your waking hours and energy. And therefore, we're not very thoughtful about choices we make. And that may have been okay for the last 30, 40, 50 years when the world was more benign. I think the consequences of living life that way are quite a bit more dramatic now. And so I talk about this intentional life, where you are more aware about all your choices. Your choice, for instance, of who do you hang out with? So I've spent a lot of time on that your networks shape your life. And you're the sum of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Why? Because that influences your priorities, how you see life, what you believe, what you aspire to and define as success. And so if you hang out with this group, it's one thing. If you hang out with that group, it's a different thing. So be intentional about that. We live in a time of a lot of fake news and disinformation and people in powerful positions who lie, just outrageously lie. And if you're not careful, you can start believing some of these things and get sucked into a false narrative. I am amazed at the number of my friends from Harvard Business School from 30 years ago. That means they are as smart as any one of us, as educated as any one of us, and some of the things they believe in. Okay, a lot of them buy into Trump's narrative. Okay, so you have to be very careful about where you get your information, how do you apply some critical thinking to what you believe in, etc. That's intentionality. You have to be intentional about who you are. Most of us don't spend time till life forces you to think about what kind of a person am I, and what are my beliefs and values? Am I happy with those choices or not? And I think it's very important. Why is it so important, Fanny? Because if the world around us is like this river that is turbulent and fast flowing and everything is like moving at high speed, you better be anchored in something. And so you have to be anchored around your own beliefs, values, your own definition of success, your commitments. And it's important to make these choices intentionally. So a big part of the reason for writing the book was not to give answers and give advice. I don't have much advice. I want to provoke people like you to start thinking about these things. And once you think about it, you'll come to your own conclusions. So that's what I meant by intentionality.
And okay, so on the spectrum of awareness or self-awareness around the many topics you've covered, if you're on the high end, I observe that sometimes it can be a little bit overwhelming to live in the current world. And what would you say about how do you restore yourself, or how do you keep yourself in a capacity to feel happy, to provide happiness, to transfer to others?
It's a challenge, I think, which is becoming bigger and bigger for every one of us every single day, because you see what's happening around the world. You see the news. It's just very, very concerning. And you can get caught up in depression and anxiety very, very quickly. So there are a number of things I would say. The first thing you've raised a really important question, Fanny, which is this issue of happiness. Okay? Because the central desire of every one of us, every human being, is to be happy. Okay? And we end up fairly early in life developing a theory of happiness, what will make us happy, and then we pursue it. So for many people, the theory of happiness is what is called the missing tile theory, which is you focus on what it is you don't have, and you believe, if only I get that, I'll be happy. If only I get this great job at Boston Consulting Group, I'll be happy. If only I get this promotion, I'll be happy. If only I find true love, I'll be happy. And, the moment you get it, you start losing interest and you focus on what else is missing. And so the goalpost is always moving. You're always chasing happiness, never finding it. So that's one sort of problem with chasing happiness. Many of us on this call, including myself particularly, have a different theory of happiness, which is even more seductive. Success will lead to happiness. And so we start chasing success. So you work harder and harder to achieve things, and then you hope that'll get rewards and recognition and feel successful. And then one day you wake up, and typically it happens in midlife, and you're on this treadmill, you're working harder and harder, and there is some success, but it takes more and more effort to get the same success, and there's no joy. Then you say, what the heck? So the thing I realized in this decade through a lot of work is happiness is what psychologists call synthetic. Okay, synthetic means it isn't real. It is manufactured by your mind. And both happiness and its opposite, misery, are manufactured by the mind. And you see this when you look around you. Somebody has everything and they're miserable. Somebody has nothing and they're still smiling. So the key thing here is to learn to control your mind and not get attached to your thoughts, and to learn through meditation or other practices to see thoughts as just clouds on the sky. And sometimes they're happy thoughts, sometimes they're sad thoughts, but not attach yourself to it. So that's kind of one important thing. The second incredible discovery is this: the more you think about yourself and your happiness, the more elusive it becomes. And only when you stop thinking about it can you find joy. And the way you stop thinking about yourself and happiness is by immersing yourself in something else. And somebody here may be a good tennis player. When you play tennis, for that 1 hour, you're not thinking about, and you have a great time. Same thing with when you're doing something really interesting at work or building something. You forget for a time to think about yourself. And that's when you're really happy. As a parent, when you're completely focused on building it on your child, suddenly you're happy. So the less you focus on yourself, the greater the possibility of happiness. So I think there's a whole chapter on happiness in the book, so read it, because it's some very honest things I learned about it. But in this crazy world, there are a few more things. First of all, I think disconnecting from media and social media is very helpful. Because yeah, sure, there's a lot of suffering in Ukraine, but what is it that I can do about it? Okay, I found myself asking that question. Unlike climate change, there's precious little. It just depresses and saddens me to see the suffering out there. So I have shut off all my, I got off Facebook 5 years ago, Twitter last year. I've stopped watching news. If there's something happens, then I go look for it intentionally. But I think disconnecting yourself from a lot of this noise helps, because what you find is your immediate world is not as bad as the bigger world. Okay, people are still normal, going about life. They're still decent like they were last year. So that's one. And I think finding ways to be constructive and be the change you want to see in the world, allows you to feel better about yourself. The world may still fall apart, but you feel better about yourself and your life and so forth. And the human connection with other people, good people, is something I get a lot of energy from, okay? So find positive things that give you energy and disconnect yourself from as many things as you can that are negative and drain energy.
Thank you, Ravi. So I want to just pause here my questioning for some time, and please, you can deactivate your mics. So I'd like to open the floor for others to ask questions. So if you can just turn your camera on and maybe think about how does that resonate with you and what you'd like.
Yeah, and by all means disagree. The whole idea was to provoke.
Who was provoked by Ravi? Please, this is a time for you. I can continue. I have like many provocative thoughts now in my head, but yeah, go ahead, Chandru.
Yeah, hi, Fanny. Hi, Ravi. This is Chandru here from Mumbai. Thanks a lot for all your inputs. Greatly value it. And one point which piqued my interest was on the quality of leadership, which you said, which I'm completely on board with that. But however, we see in the global theater, the leadership of countries.
Yeah.
I think
do not necessarily reflect like Singapore.
Chandru, you're cutting a little bit, so.
And which is probably actually in tune with the. Okay. Let me cut the video. Okay. Yeah. I don't know whether you got the point was about actually the the quality of leadership, or the qualities which are required for leadership are more actually, I think, reflective of the corporate world. While in the global theater, we do see these qualities are not the necessary ones, which are actually, providing success of leadership or the longevity of leadership in some of these countries. It's a mixed bag, of course. You've got actually, probably despots who get thrown away, but at the same time, you do have, many strong men who do not reflect these qualities going on for a very, very long time. So how does one reconcile these conflicts?
I don't know that there's a conflict. I think globally you see a rising tide of authoritarian leaders. And you certainly see that in our own country. You see that in all over the world. It's a big trend. And I think why that is people are completely confused and lost. And authoritarian leaders tend to have a very simple, powerful narrative that is appealing. And so, so that's just what's out there. But look, my whole point around leadership is that to not just look at who's already there, but we need to see many more people not wait for some formal mandate and begin to step up and act. And that includes especially people like all of us on this in this conversation. And unless if you keep sitting in your house, on your office and hoping for better leadership, hope's not a strategy. You're going to get whatever you see. But if many more of us begin to start acting, hopefully, some of us will begin to get to places where we're able to make a profound difference and the quality of leadership will change. So I think that's what I'm advocating, that we need to all start stepping up and taking small steps. And that's how things may change, if ever. But if we sit around and bemoan the quality of leadership, well, things are only going to get worse.
Thank you.
There is Clive. I don't know if your camera or if your mic is working, but there is a thank you from Clive in the chat, which you may want to extend it orally, Clive.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Fanny? Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Hi. Thanks a lot, Ravi, for this very insightful fireside chat that is organized by the INSEAD alumni in France. Really, really good session, I would say. And it's sort of the advice that you gave, because I was almost asking a similar question to myself, when I just read that book. When you showed that book, maybe this book will help my daughter because she's not sure about what to do next. And the conversations that we have, every time I ask her, so what subjects do you want to choose? And she says, well, I don't know. And so that's something similar to what I'm going through as well. Like I've written in my the message that I send there, and perhaps it's something that is that she's picked up from me, because I'm also at some stage at the stage in my life where I'm also very confused about what do I do next, and then where do I go next, and all that kind of stuff. So hopefully the book will help both of us. I'm looking forward to reading it.
Great. No, two things I want to say. For the youngest reader of the book so far is 14, and the oldest is 93.
Wow.
So, that apparently is reasonably simple enough that both ends of the spectrum can engage. The other thing is, this is a question that I say in my preface to the book, is naturally pops up every decade.
Mm-hmm.
And you shouldn't feel bad about it, saying, I'm confused about what to do next. See that as an opportunity to find the answer to that. So I actually think it's very good that from time to time we are not so clear. And it's an opportunity to experiment and reinvent ourselves and go down a different path. So I think that this is entirely healthy and constructive rather than something to be wished away.
Thanks. Yeah, at the start of the pandemic, I think I was a little bit more clear about what I wanted to do. But 2 years down the line, I'm caught up in that whole fog again. So
good news.
I guess it's something that I just need to untangle myself out of, the maybe the headspace, and maybe your book will give me some, some ideas of how to get there.
Yeah, for anybody else who might at some point find themselves in a similar situation. From time to time, we end up knowing what we don't want to do, but not knowing what we want to do. And it's all confusing. At that moment, the most constructive thing you can do is try lots of different things, micro experiments. It's like building prototypes of the future. And those experiments will give you the feedback as to what, eventually what your path needs to be. If you sit around trying to think about it, you may not get there. The key
design, think your life.
Exactly. Design, think your way to your future.
Okay. Thanks.
So Alastair, give you the mic. Thank you, Clive.
Thanks, Fanny. Ravi, your comment a few moments ago reminds me of my grandmother, who used to say, "Oh, I don't watch the news anymore, it's all bad." And I sort of a little bit in that same theme tend to focus on science magazines and technology magazines and websites and all these sources of information about what's coming what's in the lab right now, and it's about to save us all. Whether it's energy breakthroughs or fusion power or vaccine breakthroughs and discoveries and so on. And so, I'm fundamentally a sort of techno optimist. And like to think that despite everything and despite our human weaknesses and despite the chaos, around us, that sooner or later, the forces of technology will compensate or overcompensate. Am I being naive?
Well, there was a period of time when I thought so myself, and I think we are being naive. Because what has created this mess and continues to exacerbate this mess is human behavior, particularly human tendencies like greed and violence, a proclivity for violence. And for these human tendencies, I don't know that there is a technological antidote. I did many years ago, I was stranded in some place with a guy called Pierre Omidyar. Some of you may recognize the name. He was sort of the main guy behind eBay and made a few billions, and then has now busy trying to give it away. And I had very seriously encouraged him to think about trying to find the gene that triggers greed and violence, the genes that trigger greed and violence. If we can find that and find a way to switch that off technologically, maybe that's worth it. But otherwise, no. Every technology, Alastair, has the potential to be harnessed for good or for bad. It doesn't matter which one, right? From fire to the internet and anything else. And then human beings, we collectively decide, are we going to put it largely to productive use or largely to dismal uses? So even as we develop these new technologies, we will make choices as to how to monetize it, how inclusive to make access to this. And if we haven't figured out how to solve for greed, stupidity, and violence, it's not going to change. It's now just increase the stakes. So I think we have to go back and figure out how to behave better.
Agreed. I mean, perhaps a recent example I read about was asteroid mining. There's a $250 billion worth of nickel out there in the asteroid belt. And if only we could get to it, we're good.
And I look at all these attempts to try and establish colonies on Mars or find a way to get to another planet. What about the planet right here? It's still the most hospitable that we are aware of, So I don't know why we wouldn't turn more resources and attention towards, making sure this one does okay. So there's a lot of techno optimism and stupidity out there. And I don't know of any antidote to those things.
Okay,
Sorry, go ahead.
Can I
Fanny.
just, I can't, this is the triggering question for me. It's not my masterclass, but I just want to ask one question. What do we think about the metaverse, for instance? But anyway, so I'll shut down, but.
I think it's a seriously bad idea and it's going to happen anyway.
Just I want to come back to, thank you very much, just to respond to Clive's intervention and maybe Alastair as well, and Chandru, I just have one question that is coming now. You mentioned at the beginning that you thought about the equation, number of hours worked versus money I need. I remember I have attended a program at Harvard some time ago, and one of the professor left off with this question: how much do I need to live my life, you know, in whatever condition I want to live it, and inviting us to ask ourselves this question repeatedly. I think you're bringing a different dimension to it, which is hours, earning, and then time to do what I like. Yeah.
No, look, this question, how much is enough, turns out to be a central question of life. And you know, Tolstoy wrote this beautiful short story about how much land does a man need. I remember reading this as a kid, by 5-6 years old, and it stayed with me all my life. It is a defining question. Each of us has to answer it saying, how much do I need of anything? Money, fame, success, whatever. And it turns out that if you're a reasonable person, you don't need a whole lot, but you want a whole lot more because of either greed or insecurity. And there's never enough for our greed or insecurity. And so the question is, at least at some point, you need to start thinking about, okay, what do I really need? In my book, I talk about the comparison between money and wealth and salt, right? Salt is a central ingredient in our food. But if we have too little or too much, both ends are a problem. You need just enough. And it's the same with money. So once you figure out the number, the question becomes, how do I work the minimum number of hours to make that number, whatever that number is? If you have a lot of responsibilities, a taste for good wine, and a few luxuries, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying you have to become some monk. Whatever that number is, put a number and then say, how do I get there in the minimum number of hours? And for 10 years, I found that it takes me half a day, a month to do that. Oh, great. So the real question is, what am I going to do for the other 29.5 days? Okay. So I think this is a very constructive way to think about your, your life and your income needs and choices, certainly after a point, maybe after you're 45. Till then, of course, it's fine to just be wanting more and more and more. But once it doesn't give you any more joy, I think thinking about this, Fanny, and these terms, I found to be very helpful.
Venkat, you want to ask a question, or?
Now comes the really unanswerable questions.
Right. Yeah. Thanks so much, Ravi and Fanny. Excellent learning from the session. As as we all know, Ravi, you got some jobs which probably not too many people can get. So as we were discussing in the past, what are some of the interview questions that you had during those interviews to get those jobs? Like, we assume that you had an interview with Bill Gates or the Infosys global chairman and so on. So how do those interviews happen? That's the first question. And the second question is about CEO performance. We're all aspired and probably will at least dream about being there, but CEO performance, and secondly, the CEO behavior. How would you characterize CEO behavior in terms of both at work and outside, in terms of deliberately choosing to follow the company values or the family values?
Ooh, what? I don't know that I understand the second question, but one of the important things in my book is try to get very quickly into a position where you are not seeking jobs and seeking opportunities and going for interviews, but where people are seeking you. They want Venkat, they want Fanny, they want Alistair. Okay, and so they are pounding on your door rather than you are pounding on their door. So I honestly, Venkat, for the longest time, can't remember having been in an interview for a role. Okay. And so, you know, whether it was Infosys and you know those circumstances better, or, you know, the Global Energy Alliance or UNICEF or Microsoft, they wanted me. And it was more a, you know, a conversation about what's the mission and, you know, is it likely to be successful or not? And this is a very important thing. So in my chapter on career strategies, I say, look, if there's a mouse that has entered your living room, you're never going to catch it by running after it. The only hope you have is by putting some tasty thing and waiting for it to come to you. So you have to follow the same strategy. You have to become so tasty, so appealing that all these opportunities, all these employers, all these people are coming to you saying, will you come and help us? And how do you cultivate a reputation and the capabilities and the track record, etc., that allows that to happen? So yeah, sure, I did have a conversation with Bill in 2003. It was the most sort of unlikely thing because I had spent 16 years building diesel engines. In 2003, I didn't even do email. My secretary used to print out the email and give me a folder. I would write my answers and give it back to him. And yet Microsoft, for some bizarre reason, which we still don't understand today, wanted me to head their business here. And so I told Bill this, and he laughed and said, I hope you learn quickly. But we spent the rest of our time talking about India, the trends in India. And I think he was just trying to sense, do I think reasonably, sensibly or not? And can I deal with very high levels of uncertainty? Yeah, so, but I think I'm seizing this point for all of you who are still in sort of mid-career, early career. Get quickly to a point where you are so sought after that you don't have to be the one, you know, doing these traditional interviews. And I don't understand your question about CEO values versus family values. If it perhaps means how do you integrate work and life? How do you maintain some sort of a balance, both in terms of time and priorities, but also in terms of who you are as a person versus what you have to do to lead a successful enterprise? My own, I'm no authority on this, but I'd sense it's very hard over the long term to be different. You can't be one thing at work and go back home and be different. And the more you try and be authentic and integrate these two selves, these two parts of your life together, the more sustainable it is. Whether or not it's wildly successful or popular, I don't know. And even more importantly, I don't know of any way to be very impactful while having work-life balance. Okay, if you want, you know, a lot of personal time, you're necessarily going to have some trade-offs in terms of how much career success and impact you can enjoy. And I never tried for work-life balance. I tried to just integrate these things as much as possible with reasonable success. And much of that comes from choosing things that you genuinely enjoy. So it's not like there is work and there is fun. Work becomes fun. Okay. So the more you can avoid these trade-offs and choices, which are very hard, and create more points of integration, I think the better off it might be. But this is just my view. It worked well for me.
Thank you, Ravi. I want to be conscious of the time. So let me ask you a couple of rapid questions for the end, and just to close this conversation. Intuition or intelligence? What do you rely on?
I think it's both. I personally tend to think of intuition as a type of intelligence. Intelligence has many forms. So I don't see a dichotomy. It's both.
If you were going to live alone on an island, what book would you bring?
Did I get shipwrecked or did I choose to go live?
Okay.
No, but I would probably, if I'm going to be there for a long time, like years, and it was only one book, I'd probably bring a book which is filled with stories of human adventure. And that can be anything like one of the epics, or could be the Bible or something. Because in each story you find reasons and lessons and meaning and all that. But yeah.
One hobby you've picked up in the last year?
During COVID, I picked up gardening. And so there was no gardener, and so I started tending it myself, and then it became bigger and bigger, and there were more and more insects and birds. It was beautiful. Unfortunately, after COVID, the gardeners started coming back and lost the hobby.
Okay. And lastly, if you met a genie, what would be your 3 wishes?
Love, love, love. My 3 wishes would be for us, all of us, to learn to love ourselves, to love each other and love the planet. That's it.
Thank you. Let me thank you very much on behalf of the participants and again the Alumni Association in France. It was very inspiring, and I also appreciate the fact that you had to make quite some effort given the recent sickness that you were sharing at the beginning. So thank you very much, Ravi. Maybe just one last word from you, or
well, first of all, I want to say thank you to you and to Venkat for organizing this, you more so for anchoring this, and to the association, and all of you who stayed on for an hour and 15 minutes patiently on a weekday morning. And I want to say good luck. I hope you do wonderful things with your life. There's, despite all the madness around us, there's probably also never been a better time to be alive. There's more opportunity. And I ask myself, when would I rather be young? And I'd say probably today. So yeah, so there's still lots of reasons to stay optimistic.
Thank you, Ravi. And enjoy the rest of the day, and enjoy the day for the participants in France. Thank you.